Today's guest, Adele Getty, is a true psychedelic elder, goddess, pioneer. I don't remember the first time I crossed paths with Adele, but it was many years ago, as we share many different communities. I would say we really started to get to know each other in 2019 at the Psychedelic and Integration Conference at Esalen, where we were able to really drop in and share meals with sister friends who we had in common. Adele has so many extraordinary stories, and I can't wait for you to hear more. So let's get started. Adele, thank you for saying yes to be on the podcast. It is such an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Carla. This is really a treat for me and a wonderful way to be with you and see where this conversation goes. I'm kind of excited about it.
Well, that's the thing. This conversation could go so many different ways. You have lived such a rich and diverse life, but I think I would like to start with your beginning. Can you just share a little bit about your upbringing? I know you were born in California. Tell us about your early days.
Actually, I was born in Pennsylvania.
Oh, so
Um,
much for what you find on the web.
I moved to California in my late teens after high school and after the first year of college. But I would say my bizarre interest in the whole field of psychedelics began in 1957. I was 7 years old at the time. And Life Magazine was delivered to my house. And in the Life Magazine was this 15-page spread on Gordon Wasson, Maria Sabina, photographs of the ceremony. And I was a pretty precocious reader at that point, and I devoured this magazine because in my little girl mind, it was like real life Indians, a real life woman Indian. There was magic mushrooms. There was, ceremony and healing. And I think those were the things that attracted me as a 7 year old. And I never forgot that moment of reading that magazine. And about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, a friend of mine bought me the original edition of that magazine, which I have. And I've been able to go back, and look at it and go, oh my God, so much of my life got enfolded into that experience of reading about these visions and smoke and feathers and real Indian woman and all of that.
I would call that a soul breadcrumb. Or maybe like your soul dropped a whole loaf of bread on you at age 7. Like, here, imprint this. So this is Gordon Wasson's journey down to, yeah, to work with
Yes.
Maria Sabina. Amazing. I mean, that obviously was a seminal article, but to have read it and taken it in at age 7. And I know the things that I read at that age that also are my little breadcrumbs, and they just were like, wait, what is this concept of, for like one of the mine was like, what's reincarnation? And just these
Yeah.
things that would later come back to spark and be an important, part of our later psyche. It's so interesting.
Yes, I agree. And yeah, th- I, I, I feel like the unfolding of a life is such a interesting and mysterious thing that happens to each one of us, and how often are we could never predict where our life was. If we're lucky, we were not able to predict where our life would take us.
Right. Well, so what kind of values and mores were instilled in you?
At that point, as a
Hmm.
child,
As a child?
I I think you know basic, good, all American. values of being honest, being kind. I feel like I was lucky. I did not have alcoholic parents, or I didn't have Ozzie and Harriet, but I didn't have horrible, horrible things that happened to me. And as a little girl, I'm grateful to both my parents and that they encouraged me to be anything I wanted to be, do anything I wanted to do, get an education, and also not get married young.
Yeah, that's a big one. What was your relationship with nature as a child?
Huge. It was huge. I was lucky to have fields and woods nearby that I could, play in with my friends and neighbors, and had pets and dogs, and animals were an important part of it. Horses were an important part of it, and just being in nature, vegetable gardens, eating tomatoes out of the garden, all of that. Yeah.
It sounds delightful. All right, so you've been a wisdom keeper in this field for decades, long before the current psychedelic renaissance. So, what first called you into this work? You've got that imprint at age 7, but what did your early journey with medicine look like?
I feel like I graduated high school in 1967. It was the summer of love, that summer. My little town in Pennsylvania, there was no marijuana that I knew of. There certainly were no psychedelics or anything like that. I was actually very confused by what I was reading in the paper about Timothy Leary, tune in, turn on, drop out, LSD, marijuana, drugs were bad, but
Mhm.
these were people from Harvard, Ralph Metzner and Richard Alpert. So it was a confusing time for me. And I would say, I was probably about as straight as you could imagine. None of the counterculture had hit my little town. But when I went off to college, and I feel like I was lucky in that I made contact with the hippies, and they were not what they were supposed to be. They were actually quite intelligent and had interesting conversations. And they turned me on eventually to marijuana. Um, the same day that I was being initiated into a sorority.
Perfect.
Um,
Good bookend.
and the marijuana and the hippies were far more interesting than the sorority. I then went to the sorority initiation quite high on marijuana, with secret handshakes and a certain kind of solemnness. And I never went back.
Wait, now what sorority did you abandon?
Tri Delta,
Okay.
Delta, Delta, Delta.
Uh-huh.
I loved the idea of the sorority
Hmm.
and the idea of the Greeks and the kind of ethics and philosophy that that was what attracted me. But I didn't find it to be as truthful as I found the hippies were living much more according to those ethics and dynamics than the drunken, crazy parties that I found myself in with the sorority and fraternities. So yeah,
I kept with my sorority, so I was a Kappa, and I didn't have that. I didn't really do my first psychedelics until the very, very last day of college. So there was no the alternative. We're not being offered. But I know what you're talking about with that drunken aspect, and then but there's a sisterhood there. But it's a weird. It's both. It's I'm glad I stayed because what I learned in that sisterhood was all sides of it. The
yeah,
really, really beautiful, supportive, loving, and that place where we as women have been trained, or I don't know, whatever happened where we got turned against each other. That was also in there. And
Right.
it was interesting to experience that. I'll say that.
I definitely, there were women in the sorority that I felt an affinity with and a connection with as well. And it was later that year, I feel very lucky in that they really initiated me with marijuana. They took care of me and they fed me chocolate and food and took me for a drive. And it was not just like, oh, here we're going to get loaded, kind of thing. And a number of months later, and I watched people get high and I watched people on psychedelics. So I was curious and I was very cautious. And a number of months later, I had the opportunity to take LSD with an older couple, um, 1968. Yes, it would have been 1968. And they were living together. It was kind of like, ooh, they were a couple of years older, than me. It's not like they were 30 or anything. But they very much curated a journey for me. And, at that point, I had no idea about really LSD or Albert Hoffman. I probably had never heard his name. I knew what was happening in San Francisco. And like I said, it was a bit confusing. Um, but that particular day on LSD in a curated environment with art supplies and even a walk outside into nature and music and flowers and set and setting, even though I'm sure they had never heard the term set and setting, and I certainly hadn't. And I had a very profound and beautiful healing experience with the LSD that I felt had kind of taken a big psychic broom and swept it through my psyche and swept away a lot of neuroses, family patterns, and I didn't find it painful. It wasn't emotional. It was just very factual and insightful, and it definitely told me that I needed to leave Pennsylvania in order to really survive. And I did. I listened. And at one point, I said to myself after it was over, I don't know who I'm going to be when I grow up. Um, I could end up working for the CIA. Um, I didn't end up working for the CIA. But I had that thought. I could end up working for the CIA, and I'm going to take this substance once a year for the rest of my life. And if I ever have a year where I take it and I don't like myself, I will change course,
Wow.
whatever that might be. And I have done that every year since now. So I took the trip very seriously.
So, how many years did you take that annual? I know you've taken probably more than one trip a year, but that annual trip, that considered trip, and found that you didn't like yourself and needed to change.
Well, let's see. I would have been 18 at that point, and I'm 76 now. So I don't know. I'd have to get my calculator out and look at that. I don't know. Let's see.
But no, but have there been times when you've been like, oh, I don't like myself, and made that big change?
Yeah, there have been times where I have definitely received messages that I should change
Mhm.
course. Uh, Maybe take the road less traveled, as Robert Frost said.
I tend to these days take it on my birthday and
Me
do my
too. Yeah.
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 That's my little life review celebration
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
rather than New Year's.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious because you didn't come out of the any sort of hippie or alternative upbringing. So what was the reaction of your family and community as you first started exploring these medicines, or did you keep it hidden?
No, when I came home from my mother, first year of college, picked me up at the. I went off to college that first year. I literally had little pumps on with a matching 1967 when the whole world was going crazy. I had a little matching suit and pumps and a matching purse, and my hair curled and flipped. And
I bet you
when
were awesome.
well, when I came home, my hair was not curled.
Right.
I had a silver peace sign around my neck.
Oh dear.
And my mother took one look at me and said, "Are you on drugs?" And I said, yes, I got to smoke marijuana." And she was like, "Oh my God, you'll be on heroin next." And I was like, "No, I'm not going to be on heroin next." And
But maybe LSD.
maybe, yeah, I didn't quite go there. But anyway,
We
I
were
think,
raised by the same mother, by the way.
well, I think I said, "No, no, you have to read about it and understand." And I explained what my experience had been. And I can't, say that they were thrilled, with the change in me, but they also were not horrified and completely alarmed that I would, disappear down some alley or something, So I was lucky in that way. I tried to turn them on to marijuana. They were like, "Hey, we don't even really get high on alcohol. Why would we want to do that?" And I was like, "Fine.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah."
But you told them early. I mean, I didn't tell my mother till she was 95, so
Uh,
I kept most of that from her.
oh, yeah. Uh,
All right. Well, so you continued your journey as a seeker, and then you ended up meeting and marrying Francis Huxley in 1986, who was Aldous Huxley's nephew. So Francis had a deep immersion in Amazonian shamanism. I'm curious how that influenced your own understanding of plant medicine and the sacred.
Well, I back that up a little bit in that, growing up in the 60s was a very tumultuous time. We think it's tumultuous now, and it was equally tumultuous then, in the sense that Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, the Vietnam War, the women's movement. There were so many political upheavals happening, and they were very real for us as teenagers, growing up at that time. Um, when Kennedy was assassinated, our local newspaper had a little blip, the only non Kennedy blip in the whole newspaper on the front page. And it said that Aldous Huxley died the same day that Kennedy was assassinated. I,
I
I,
didn't know
I,
that.
yes, and I had just, as part of ninth grade, read Brave New World and 1984, and again, it was one of those moments where this means something. I don't know what, but something's ending. Some hope of the world is ending, and some new strange thing is about to emerge. That was my feeling back then. I did not know at 13 that I would end up married into that family. Again, it's that kind of unfolding. And so, Francis, I had been teaching at Sonoma State a class called Ritual and the Imaginal Process. And I had used Francis's book called The Way of the Sacred for that class. And again, I didn't know that I would have, in 1984, I would meet him and we would end up falling in love. And by then I was well into, both ceremony, finding a way to use psychedelics inside my community in a way that was meaningful in a collective way with one another. And I was like the psychedelic cheerleader inside my extended community. I was always thinking up ways of oh, let's all get together and we'll do this, and we'll have this kind of experience or whatever it might be. So meeting Francis and falling in love felt as bizarre as it was and as shocking as it was to my community because he was 26 years older than me and from that particular family. But it seemed very natural to me, and was a very significant, wonderful, wonderful part of my life with him. We were married for 15 years and then together, not as a couple, for another 17. And my husband after him, Michael, we took care of Francis in the last years of his life, and he lived in our guest house at our property. And for me, it speaks of not only who we are, he was, and Michael and myself, but also the impact of psychedelics in our lives that we were able to because he's the one who ended the relationship. I did not end it. I want to be clear about that. Most people think, oh, he was so much older, I ended it, but he ended it. And, but that the way love can transform and that we could continue loving and caring for one another and take medicine together and move through those kinds of transformations and rites of passage together.
Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please, go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Adele, you're right. It's so much of who you and Michael are. Is that knowing you? I didn't know Francis, but what a beautiful story, and what a beautiful just commingling of and honoring of lives, and what you all meant to each other, and tending and caring for the village. That's really beautiful. Thank you for going into that detail.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's an important part of, how these medicines, if they don't really show up in your life and all the challenging moments that we get to pass through as human beings, and if we only revert back to like 1956 inside our emotional body and our mind around love, relationships, children, husbands, wives, parents, all of it, what's the point?
Well, what was it like to be part of the Huxley family lineage?
Um, it was like getting a PhD. In the sense of, we lived in and out of California and London and Santa Fe. And the opportunity to, like, especially in London, to be with, Nobel Prize winners, some of them parts of the family, people in the actual family. Francis's mother, his father, Aldous is famous in the psychedelic space because of his experiences with Humphrey Osmond and writing, The Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell. But Francis's father, who passed before I was part of the family, so I never knew him. I only knew of him. But it's a family of humanitarians. And he is still the most quoted biologist of the last century. And he started UNESCO after the war. And Francis's mother he was knighted, so he was like Sir Julian, and his mother was Lady Huxley. And there was that whole thing. But they were also very connected. They were all part of the Bloomsbury set, Virginia Woolf and who wrote Lady Chatterley's, D.H.
These
Lawrence.
ones, yeah.
His mother typed the manuscript of Lady Chatterley's Lover while they were vacationing in Switzerland. And so I would hear, and these people would come by, and have tea. And I would hear these stories, and Bertrand Russell, and who was called Bertie, and Bertie said this, or Virginia Woolf did that, or, whatever. It was bizarre and wonderful. And she was quite the lady, Juliet, and a really wonderful. Um, I just fell in love with her immediately. And so it was for that little girl in Pennsylvania, in that small town in Pennsylvania, to, you know, end up in that kind of environment was, magic and unforeseen, unexplainable. And
I don't know. I think it was foreseen. Here you are, you're like taking note of Aldous Huxley's death. And I mean, there's those, as I said, there's those breadcrumbs. The soul's like, pay attention to this, pay attention to that.
exactly, and currently, and I'm recalling a lot of this right now because I am working on this book, and I've been encouraged by somebody I respect to tell more of my personal story. So I'm writing this, into it, and as like a launching place of being able to say more specific things that I've learned, about psychedelics, the medicine space, being with people on psychedelics, and the healing capacity, and many other aspects of what these medicines do and provide us with.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this book, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But I want to go back to, so we talked about the legacy of the Huxleys, but let's talk about your psychedelic lineage. So I know it's going to include Leo Zeff, who was the secret chief, and you shared a long term friendship with Ricky Coddington, who was also my teacher, who just passed. And I spoke about her in episode 34. And you knew Ralph Metzner, who was also my teacher. But who do you consider to be your psychedelic lineage, and how did you find them all?
I would say, I definitely had some roots inside the Native American community, with teachers who were known to be rebels, in that they were willing to teach and be with non Indian people. And there was a very important man in Sonoma County. I don't feel like I can really say his name, but he was the person who really introduced me to the idea that these medicines could be used ceremonially, with us as non native people, and that we could find our own way into a deeper way of being in these ceremonies, without having to sing like a Lakota, or pray in a particular tone of voice or in a particular manner, that we could do this in our own voice, in our own way, and as a woman, which was very important. And also, I would say Prem Das and Brant Secunda with the Huichols, and Don Jose, the old shaman that Joan Halifax wrote about in Shamanic Voices, was very significant in teaching me personally something about the medicine and about humor in ceremonial space, a very non-Christian way of being, that animistic form of being together, close to the land. It was very important. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. You were talking about like just being a woman in any of that Native American teaching. That is not the normal traditional space. So,
Right.
can you speak a
Well,
little bit more about that?
yeah, I think one of the teachers, one of the early teachers was Sun Bear. And Sun Bear, he did these medicine wheel gatherings, and myself and a former partner, we actually organized the Bay Area medicine wheel gatherings, and there was grandmother Evelyn Eaton as well, who and Jaimio Storm, who wrote Seven Arrows, and the thing that they and even and Rolling Thunder, and the thing that was so interesting with them was that they didn't want me and the non-Indian people around them to try to be Indians. They wanted to embed in us something about the land, about the four directions of knowing our place on the land with nature, and what that means to live close that way and to be aware of nature. And Sun Bear was the one who made the bumper sticker, "The Earth is our mother." Conceptually, that was a brand new idea then, this would have been like in the 1970s. Now it's like, oh, yeah, yeah, sure, the Earth is our mother. But introducing those kinds of ideas into contemporary culture was kind of, it was a big deal. And it was like, okay, how do we then begin to create meaningful rites of passage for ourselves? How do we begin to acknowledge what these transformations are in people's lives, from adolescence, marriage, divorce, children, dying, all of those things. So I became very interested in that, and eventually wrote a book about that called, what is it called? A Sense of the Sacred. And, that those ideas became fundamental to, well, how do we do that with psychedelics? How do we find our own ceremonial ways to hold these medicines in a sacred way, in the company of others, the company of other non-native people? Did that make any sense? I'm
It
not
did,
sure.
but what I'm really hearing, there was a passing of information an intentional, you're not Native American, but we want to share the importance of these tools and tools such as the four directions. And yet, here we are, we're also in a world where there's all this talk of cultural appropriation, which is very important to address.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I mean, I myself have sat with that when I call in the four directions. I'm like, is this is it's not is this my culture? What is my culture? My culture has been lost. I'm a muddled, European mutt. Is it okay to pick and choose from these other lineages? Are there some things that are sacred to all? Are there some things that can only be sacred to certain traditions? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the idea of knowing where you are is important. Knowing where the sun sets, where the sun rises, where the moon rises. And I think, this idea of the four, it seems to be universal. And one tradition might have water being in the east, and another might have water being in the south, and whatever. But I think that's not what's so important, but it's like, how do we make these things relevant to us as modern contemporary people? And we don't have to take it from other traditions. At one of the medicine wheel gatherings, we had, I don't know if I should talk about this, but it was a public event. It was a public event. And we had the American Indian movement come, and they wanted to speak. They were headquartered in Oakland. And uh, Sun Bear's response was, let's just stop everything and allow them to speak. And so, these gatherings had like 1,000 people at them for 3 days. And they really took the audience to task around beads, sweat lodges, feathers, appropriation things, cultural. What we didn't have a term for it, I think, back then at that point, but all of the things that are cultural appropriation. And what was interesting was the people in the audience, there was a woman there, and she was like, "Excuse me," she goes, "I'm I'm from Czechoslovakia, and we make those beads, and we have a culture around the beads. And so, am I not allowed to have beads or wear beads? Because those beads come from my lineage." And somebody from Finland was like, "Well, we sweat. We have a long tradition of sauna." And so it ended up being a very peaceful exchange of information, of realizing that, so many of these things take us back into our own lineages of, Europe, Eastern Europe, India, Africa, wherever it might be. And I think that when we talk about shamanism and healing, midwifery, herbal medicine, I think that somewhere probably in each of our lineages, we have those kind of traditional healers who lived in a village somewhere. And that as ancestors, nobody has a market on ancestors, and we all have them. And we certain things get passed down, through our lineages. So I feel it's really important to honor the traditional people and to acknowledge their wisdom. And I feel like it's okay for us to move beyond that as modern day people and find our own ways. And if our ways are true and strong, our children and our children's children and the young people in our communities will pick up those ways, and they will become a tradition.
Yeah, and then I had I had these thoughts about this at one point in a psychedelic journey, and I was doing past life regression work with Ralph Metzner, and I saw that I had been in a past life that I had been a Native American dancer, and so I'm thinking, no, wait a minute, so is that then is that my culture? So, hundreds of years ago, so, maybe it was my culture, but I mean, I've had such a deep affinity. I mean, I know you live in New Mexico. You have a deep affinity with New Mexico, but it's the minute I landed there in the '80s, I was like, oh, this is my second home. I mean, my third home. I grew up in Florida. I live in California, which I really consider my heart state, but it's also New Mexico. So I do think that there's that maybe imprinting, that past life imprinting that comes back when you land back at a place where you've lived and you're like, this is resonant with me. I can feel this. I've been here. I understand this land. I love this land. And I can feel, I want to be part of the energy of it and, and part of the culture of it. But is it 100% true? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I think that all of those ideas around past lives and our deeper connection into things are uh, part of the mystery of our lives. And I think if our intention is healing, connection, love, bigger, expanded awareness, more awareness around the earth, around the animals, around the plants, the ancestors, all of those kinds of things, then let's encourage that with one another. Let's honor the traditions that are still alive, and let's one of the things I learned was that one tribe's taboo is another tribe's medicine,
Mm.
and one tribe's medicine is another tribe's taboo. And it's important to know who you are and where you are and what your medicine is and what your taboo may be. And not and if your taboo is another tribe's medicine, that's okay too, and there should be some kind of mutual respect there.
Amen to that. Let's circle back and talk a little bit about Ricky Coddington, since she just passed. And she kept herself so deeply underground. So I would like to surface, which I know she wanted us to do after she passed. I'd like to surface. Is there anything that you know about her or that you learned from her that you'd like to share?
Ricky had a very Zen way of teaching. She would just drop these little pearls into the pool of your psyche and they would resonate outward, right? You know? And, she told me that ibogaine was her favorite medicine. And you may have talked about that on
Now,
the
you and I
podcast
chatted
the
about
other.
it, that you had asked her that, and we were laughing because you asked her what her least favorite medicine was. And what was that?
Mushrooms.
Right. And you also, I think you agreed with that for yourself.
Yeah, I would probably agree. I definitely would agree with that,
Yeah, and
for
they're not my
myself.
first choice.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, I've had decades of great, use of them, and I will continue to use them, but definitely not. And it's so funny because they have become
yeah.
they're the leading edge right now.
They are.
Um,
They
and
well,
there's
and now maybe ibogaine is the leading
right,
edge.
maybe I
But
became
yeah,
the leading edge.
she said she went to meet Leo Zeff, and she thought she was going to a meditation retreat or learn about meditation. And he ended up giving her ibogaine and I believe LSD too.
Hmm.
And she spent a day underneath a tree, with the ibogaine. I'm sure it was a milder dose than what we think of at one of the, where a flood dose of
Hmm.
it. And I have no idea what kind of form it was in or anything. And so that was the beginning of her, journey, I think, into the psychedelic space. I think she was already very much part of Arica with Oscar Ichazo and that whole community at that point. I would think. I'm not really sure, to tell you the truth. But I know that about a year ago, she told Michael that she was ready to go. And she had had a dream about Leo and that she saw this barn and the barn door, and she could see light coming out around the edge of the barn door. And when she went there and opened the door, Leo was there. And he said, "This is where you'll be coming." And she said, it was about a year ago, and she was like, "I'm ready. We're all going there, and I'm ready." So I thought it was beautiful that, in her passing, and that on Saturday was her memorial, that was held in Hawaii and with the Eureka people, and your podcast that you did. And on Saturday, this ibogaine bill got signed Saturday morning
Yep. President Trump
by
signed an executive
President
order.
Trump, and the day before Bicycle Day. And it all felt like again, this is a really beautiful convergence of the mystery and Ricky, and some has meaning, like that
Yeah.
article, and so many things that do make meaning in the course of a life. So I'm very happy for that. And I want to acknowledge the community at large around Ricky, because of that. She was such a quiet teacher and so underground, and the fees that she charged for her work were really, really low, low, low. And that, these last 3 years or so of her life, and Jack being in care in Hawaii, that the community at large, via Limina Foundation, um,
You helped the larger donations happen. So I'll have that in the show notes, the link to that. But there's a GoFundMe for continuing to help
Jack,
Jack with the remainder of his life.
yes.
And there's a GoFundMe for smaller donations, but Limina is accepting larger donations of $1,000 or more, which
And that,
are then a write-off.
yes, yeah, $1,000 or more. And that over these years, um, I think it's like $400,000
Yeah.
that the community at large,
Mm-hmm.
it, we should all be incredibly inspired
Yeah,
by
totally.
that and
Yes.
pat each other on the back. Whoever gave little amounts, big amounts,
Mm-hmm.
regular amounts, but that this psychedelic community could hold Ricky and Jack in so much esteem. They did not have a website. They did not
No.
have social media. They There was no fame, glamour around what they did. It was very, very quiet and yet
Yeah.
obviously so
Yeah.
impactful, you know. So
Yeah.
um it, it's a thing of beauty.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned Trump signing that executive order, so let's jump there. So he signed an executive order which accelerates access to treatments for patients with serious mental illness using psychedelics. But so that's one direction, using it on a medicalization model. But Michael Pollan came to, underground guides when he was a healthy, curious person just looking for transformation, writing his book. So, do you think the current medicalization trend is actually leaving behind the majority of people who might benefit most from these medicines?
I think if it only ends up in the medical model that, and you have to prove some diagnosable illness, they work. They work if you do have a diagnosable illness.
Yeah.
Let's be very clear about that.
Don't we all have
They
a diagnosable at this point in this world? Doesn't
well,
everybody have anxiety and depression?
I like to call us like the normal neurotics,
Yeah.
who don't fit the criteria to be able to be in a clinical trial, right?
I don't think there's any more healthy normals.
I know, but I think there's a bigger truth behind it in that psychedelics never went away,
Mhm.
um, and over the last from 1965 till now, however many years that is, I don't even know, 40, 50, 60 years, they already scaled themselves in the culture at large.
It's true. The underground's not going to go away. Well, so let's go to your book, because the book that you mentioned that you're writing is called Beyond the Medical Model: Psychedelics for the Betterment of Well People.
Well, I'm not quite
Oh,
sure
it might
if
change. That might change.
it might
That's what it
change.
said on Lucid News. So I
I,
figured I
I
figured titles change. You are certainly welcome to change the title of your book.
I'm battling between it, and I'm sure if I get a publisher, and when I
They'll
do get
change
a
it.
publisher, they'll change it. But I also like that talk I gave at MAPS
Hmm.
2 years ago,
Yep,
messages from the underground and other elephants in the room.
that's a great
So
title.
it's like, between it, but I am a proponent for not only the medical use of these, because I've witnessed personally myself and with others that incredible capability of these medicines to heal people, but also for the non-medical use
Hmm.
of um, people's all for people who are curious about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness and want to just be more awake, more aware, more conscious in how they're living. And so I care about that enormously. And I care about the ordinariness of the psychedelic experience, because if the phenomena is kind of meaningless, but the ordinariness of the information that gets relayed to people, that is the homework that they need to implement into their life going forward to be better versions of themselves, to course correct. Mm, That's where I'm very interested of what that is for people.
I think it's that space that's actually going to move things forward. So your MAPS talk in 2023, which did get a standing ovation, I might note. So you mentioned the title. It's Messages from the Underground and Other Elephants in the Room. So James Fadiman, he's the one who said the underground guide's expertise around psychedelics, that he called that the elephant in the room. So I was at the 2010 MAPS conference where he invited people to, who were interested to perhaps creating an organization around guiding, and the room was full the next morning around that, and out of that came the Guild of Guides, which was deeply secret and deeply underground. You were a founding member of the Guild of Guides. It was deeply underground until somebody spoke about it in
In
Rolling
Rolling
Stone
Stone.
magazine, and then that was the end of that. But what best practices were you wanting to share in your MAPS talk? And then what were you hoping people would learn from the Guild of Guides? Like, why was it important to you to be a founding member of that?
It was so great when Jim said that, and the ripple of kind of fear and paranoia that went through the group. That this was the unspoken.
Yes.
Up until then, it was all the MAPS things. I used to call them the molecule men. Let's just talk about the molecules. Well, what about the actual experience, and what about the fact that people have been having these experiences and in a variety of ways? And Jim, he just so brilliant, about it all. And I think going back to your question, it's like, how do you work with people on medicine, as like Leo would describe? How do you let them have their own experience with the medicine? That it's very different from psychotherapy. Psychotherapy up to the session, psychotherapy after the session, but during the session, how do you not influence the experience? How do you hold space for that experience in a way that you're not, I call it, leading the witness um, into, one idea or another, because you're so vulnerable psychologically, emotionally, even physically when you're, in the middle of a session. So how do you, what Mary Casamano would describe, of just holding that space of love, of being able to support someone and have them properly prepared, to do that. And like I say, then the therapeutic stuff can come in after and before, leading up to. So I'm very much a proponent of the non-directive style of holding space for somebody.
Let's talk about the amazing conference you put on last fall in Santa Fe. It was called The Enchanted State. I went and thoroughly enjoyed myself. I brought a friend with me. She thoroughly enjoyed herself. And I've had several women on the podcast who I met there. It was a beautiful event. But can you share why you decided to do this conference and why it was important to you to do it differently than most conferences?
Okay, it started off with two of our board members, Alan Petriliens and Janine Sagert, saying, let's do a benefit for Limina Foundation. And at that point, Michael and I were thinking like, oh, a dinner party.
Sounds good.
Um, well, the next thing we knew, we were renting the Lenzik Theater, our performance art theater. But it was booked for the next year and a half. So we had this year and a half window to figure out, what are we doing, and in the meantime, New Mexico passed the psilocybin bill, allowing for not synthetic psilocybin, but organic mushrooms to be used therapeutically for diagnosable conditions and end of life anxiety. And when that happened, we said, let's make this a benefit for the state of New Mexico. And we realized with the Lenzik Theater, we had this opportunity to not just do a conference with talking heads, but to make it more of a theatrical production and have film and speakers and lights and live music. And and a thing, and they it wasn't a conference. I don't even know what it was, an event. And we invited incredible people, and more people came forth, and sponsors and donors. And at the end of the day, we after all the bills were paid, we had raised over $100,000 to give, and we're in the process now of finding out for the state of New Mexico.
Mhm.
I very much would like to bring ibogaine into this, and we'll be talking with Brian Hubbard and the ibogaine initiative people around. Let New Mexico's ripe for all of this, and we're really doing it in such a good way. We are just about to put online the individual speakers. We had 3 cameras filming it. We're getting all the speakers together, and we're in the process of making a educational film, maybe like 10-minute long, for ordinary Americans, ordinary people in New Mexico, people in the Pueblos here, people in rural New Mexico who don't know anything about psychedelics. It's not part of their tradition. Mushrooms are not part of the tradition. They don't even can barely pronounce the word psilocybin. Trump could hardly pronounce ibogaine. So it's like, how can we make that educational leap into those parts of America that may be red, they may be blue. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it seems like psychedelics are a potential unifying force between Republicans and Democrats right now. It's kind of amazing. One of the things I learned today on a Zoom with some of the DC people was that there was a very specific poll done, and with very specific questions. And it didn't matter young, old, Republican, Democrat, independent, rich, poor. They allowed for all these variables. 70% said psychedelics should be available to people who need them.
Wow.
This played a role with Trump and with what happened on
Mhm.
Saturday
Yeah.
morning with the FDA, the different government agencies and the VA. So isn't that amazing?
That is an amazing number, especially given, just how separated our country is right now. That's beautiful. I
Somebody
love
said
hearing that.
unity through opportunity.
That's great.
You know, I mean, if we can find where we don't agree on much,
Yeah.
if we're agreeing on psychedelics, the future starts to look a little better to me from this
Well,
position.
I'm on that bus. Okay, last question. So since we're talking about Limina, so you and Michael, your current husband, you founded Limina Foundation.
Hopefully, my last
Yeah,
husband.
your last husband, your husband. Let's just he doesn't need
Let's just call him.
he doesn't
Yeah,
need a modifier.
right.
You and Michael. So when you founded Limina Foundation, online it's described as supporting various projects around expanded awareness, psychedelics, and indigenous peoples' use of plant medicines. And then it says the liminal space is where the old worldview is able to fall apart and a bigger view is revealed. Get there often, stay as long as you can. So, given the current state of our world, which does seem to be falling apart, what do you see as the bigger view waiting to be revealed? When we cross that threshold, what are we calling in?
Oh, I hope more peace. I hope more acceptance of the other, less demonization. I'm very disturbed and concerned about what is happening with women, and
as we all are.
as we all are, as you're paying attention to anything. And uh,
Disturbed, concerned, and now really rageful.
yeah,
That's the energy that's coming up now that I'm seeing.
yeah, yeah. And so I'm also seeing the men in the broader community who are realizing they need to stand up more for their own integrity and relationships with women. And I do feel like if you want to be a warrior for that,
Hmm.
get your warrior on and put that guy down at the water fountain who's looking at the woman, her coworker's ass going by, and shut him down with no uncertain terms. Don't
Yeah.
be nice about it. Be a warrior about it. This has got to stop.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
um, and I hope that as psychedelics make their way more into mainstream America, that families can benefit from this. Sons can benefit, mothers and sons can benefit from it, and communities and as churches begin to, and there's a couple of books coming out on Christianity, Christians and psychedelics, and Jamie Clark Soleil and various people that we might really return back to those true Christian ideals of peace and harmony and taking care of less fortunates in our communities. So we're at a crossroads. We are definitely at a crossroads in terms of climate, our planet, culturally, socially. And it's no accident that all of this is happening all at the same time. And, I have a little glimmer of hope that we can, turn some things around and create a future for those 7 generations into the future that Indigenous people remind us of.
And you spoke at the beginning. You said living through the '60s and really talking about the tumultuousness of those times. Equivalent to the time we're in right now. And of course, that's when the first rise of psychedelics occurred. They were then demonized and stamped down. But now it's a turnaround. It's coming back again. It's like they've been here and they're just showing up on such a bigger level, so much more present, so much more. The mycelium network is so much deeper, so much broader, wider,
Yeah,
and so I feel that is intentional. It's like, okay, this is the antidote to what's happening in the world. There's lots of antidotes, but this is one of the antidotes. This is one of the tools that we can use to turn this ship of state and to change the way that we look at so many things. And psychedelics do that on such a deep and profound level. So I actually have quite a bit of hope. I think it's going to be extremely messy, but I think that there is something on that liminal, once we step across that threshold to the other side, I think there is something really beautiful wanting and waiting for us to create and birth. So
I agree. And I don't want to put it all on like psychedelics
no,
being some magic bullet,
no, definitely not.
that's just,
Just a tool.
because, yeah, there's been yeah, exactly. But I
and
think
and
that,
hopefully a tool that's used well. Because you can certainly take a hammer and do a lot of damage, and you can use a hammer to do a lot of building and creating, and the same is true with psychedelics.
right. And I think that it is hopeful. We can take some hope in what happened Saturday morning, and as a way to maybe begin to heal what has been going on in the United States and this division, that has happened, because these diagnosable illnesses of PTSD, depression, trauma, sexual abuse, opioid addiction, they don't care red or blue,
No.
and every family has them.
Yes.
And if we can begin to save lives and have healing happen, then we have a chance of having common ground. So
And that
that's
that
my
starts the cycle of the 7 generations when someone is healed and then can have children from that healed space, that starts a much different cycle.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And podcasts like yours going out
Oh,
and thank you so much, for focusing on women, psychedelic divas, and the various kinds of wisdom that we hold and hopefully there are people who want to hear what that wisdom is. Yeah. So thank you, Carla.
oh, thank you. And I think they do want to hear. Everywhere I look, the divine feminine is popping and rising and showing up differently and stronger, and sometimes with anger, and that's justified, but sometimes it's just with beauty and groundedness and grace and nature and all of the things that the feminine so beautifully holds. And so I keep looking to that as my balance, to really the horror that's happening right now on our planet. So hopefully
Yeah.
that is what's going to win out.
Yeah. 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 I know. I hope
Oh,
so too. Yeah.
well,
I can't
Dell.
imagine it any other way.
Yeah,
Let's
it
let's
can't
just call
exactly.
that in,
It's why we're here. We're here to create that. So of course
Yeah.
that is what's gonna happen. That's just the way
Yeah.
it is. Adele, oh my goodness, you have lived an incredible life of service to consciousness and exploration and psychedelics. Just thank you so much for sharing some of that with us today. I know it would take many more episodes to even come close to understanding the breadth of knowledge you have. So I'm glad you're writing that book.
Me too. Yeah. I'm with the muse is happening to this. So
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe she drop in. So, can you tell people the best way to learn about your books, your work, your philanthropy? Where can they find you? And it'll be in the
um
show notes as well. But
yeah, probably, I think the Limina has a variety of things, both about the foundation and talks that I've given and, books and whatnot. And as I move forward with this book, and also soon in the next, I would say, 2 weeks, these nice edited pieces from the Enchanted State will be available on at the liminafoundation.org site.
great.
So, yeah, that'll be. There's some outstanding things that were said that
There
day.
were
We've been watching them, and
totally.
yeah.
It was an enchanting evening.
Yeah, I know. Well, may we all be enchanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Carla.
Oh, well, thank you, Adele, and thank you all for listening. And listen, you know my drill. It's like blah blah blah. But here's the deal: I keep getting pulled down on Instagram, and it has nothing to do with psychedelics. I had two posts that were pulled down that talked about the divine feminine and goddess energy. So I'm in bot world there. At some point, there's a real possibility that I'll lose my Instagram account. But while I
Oh
encourage you
my
to follow
God.
me on Instagram, please do at X at Psychedelic Divas. I also really encourage you to go to the Psychedelic Divas website and share your email. And of course, I'm going to give you my safety guide, which is a pretty important document to learning tips and tools for keeping yourself safe, especially when things go wrong in a psychedelic experience. So if you consider that, I only send a couple emails. I hate emails, so I'm only going to send you a couple emails a month, just talking about the podcast. If you consider joining my email list, that would be the nicest gift that you could give me today, and I would really appreciate it because I'm at the whim of the bots and the algorithms, and they're not shining in my favor at the moment. So, thank you for considering that.
Can you tell us again how to do that?
Which part?
How to get on your email list?
Oh, go to psychedelicdivas.com. You can sign up there. There's little,
Cool.
at the bottom of every page, there's a place to provide your email.
Great.
And I'm not going to spam you because just,
Yeah.
I respect you too much just for being a listener. Adele, thank you.
Thank you.
I know you have a dinner to make, and
Yeah.
I'm really so grateful for who you are and for saying yes to this podcast. I just so appreciate it and really appreciate your work in the world. So, thank you all, and
Thank
I'll
you.
talk to you next episode. Okay, bye bye.
Bye.